It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than any alarm. Inside the sterile chill of the Keystone National Bank vault, seasoned investigators stood amidst impossible emptiness. No shattered glass, no pry marks on the imposing steel door, no tripped sensors, just sheets. Absence. $2 million in cash, meticulously stacked bundles of $100 bills had simply vanished into thin air. The security cameras showed nothing. The logs registered no unauthorized entry. It was Tuesday afternoon, and the bank had been robbed blind sometime after the morning rush, executed with baffling precision and leaving behind not a single tangible clue. The police were stumped. The bank executives frantic, the city tabloids buzzing. They were calling it the perfect crime, a ghost heist, and the ghost, the architect of this audacious theft, could have been anyone. A disgruntled employee, a seasoned professional, and phantom slipping through unseen cracks, or perhaps he was hiding in the most obvious place of all, behind the wheel of a city bus. His face an impassive mask reflecting the ordinary rhythm of the streets. Just another unremarkable man amidst the urban sprawl. A man named Ethan Cole. Rewind the clock. Before the headlines, before the baffling emptiness of the vault, before the $2 million ghost act, there was just the relentless rhythm of the city and the man who navigated its arteries, Ethan Cole. To see him hunch slightly over the wheel of the number 12 bus at 6:03 a.m. on any given Tuesday was to see predictability personified, the crisp, if slightly worn uniform, the steady hands guiding the cumbersome vehicle, the eyes that constantly scanned road mirrors, sidewalk. They spoke of practiced competence, of a man comfortable in his routine. Too comfortable, perhaps. There was a stillness about him, an air of quiet resignation that clung to him like the faint smell of diesel and exhaust. 40-something living alone in a small apartment that overlooked a perpetually gray courtyard, his life had settled into a groove so deep it felt more like a trench. The early morning shift was his preference. The quiet hours allowed his mind to wander. Through lately, it wandered less through pleasant daydreams and more through landscapes of vague dissatisfaction. He watched the city stir, the streetlights flicker off, one by one, as the sky reluctantly brightened. Passengers came and went. The early risers, the shift workers, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. He exchanged the requisite nods, the occasional murmured greeting, but rarely more. He was a fixture, part of the urban machinery, largely unseen. Then came the 6:19 a.m. stop at Fifth Avenue, the Keystone National Bank employees. They were different, sharper dressed, carrying an air of brisk importance, their conversations buzzing with the energy of the financial world. Ethan watched them board day after day, year after year. He knew their stop and chat routines, the way they clustered together unconsciously, creating a bubble of corporate camaraderie. He'd overheard countless fragments: market fluctuations, annoying clients, upcoming audits. It was usually just noise, easily filtered out. But recently, the noise had started to resolve into something sharper. Maybe it was his own simmering discontent. Maybe it was simple boredom, but he found himself tuning in more closely. And one particular morning, the words cut through the usual chatter with unusual clarity. Two senior managers, their faces etched with weariness, were discussing logistics. "Vault maintenance this week of all weeks," one complained, rubbing his eyes. "Right after the security upgrade glitches. It's a logistical nightmare." Tell me about it, the other commiserated. And now we're back to juggling manual codes with the new key cards. Seriously, it's just asking for someone to mess up. One slip up and the whole system's compromised. He lowered his voice slightly. Between you and me, it feels less secure now than before the damn upgrade. Manual codes, key cards, compromised system. Less secure. Ethan felt a peculiar jolt, an unexpected surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with the morning traffic. These weren't just words, they were data points. He kept his face impassive, his eyes on the road, but his mind was racing, connecting these fragments to the thousands of tiny observations stored away over the years. The guards he saw taking smoke breaks at the same time every morning like clockwork, the delivery trucks dropping off packages at the rear entrance with seemingly minimal checks. The sheer predictable routine of it all. At the bank's side entrance, he watched them disembark, the familiar swipe and enter ritual, smooth, efficient, automatic. Except for the occasional fumble, like the young woman, Olivia Vance, who seemed perpetually disorganized. Just last week, she'd dropped her employee ID card as she boarded. Ethan had picked it up, the smooth plastic cool against his fingertips. Keystone National Bank, employee access. For a fleeting second, holding that small rectangle, the vague dissatisfaction he felt about his own life seemed to crystallize around this tangible object. It represented access, entry a world away from his endless loop of streets and stops. He'd handed it back, of course, but the image, the feel of it lingered. Now, connecting the memory of that card to the overheard conversation about codes and vulnerabilities, a dangerous spark ignited in the quiet, orderly corridors of his mind. The monotony of his life suddenly seemed less like a trench and more like perfect camouflage. Could the ultimate escape be hidden within the very routine that defined him? As he pulled the bus away from the curb, leaving the imposing bank behind, Ethan Cole wasn't just driving, he was calculating. The vague shape of an idea began to demand sharper edges, more defined lines. Ethan Cole, the quiet bus driver, became a student of Keystone National Bank. His daily route, a rolling classroom. His observation shifted from passive absorption to active intelligence gathering. Every morning, stop near the bank was now a calculated pause. His eyes missing nothing. He confirmed the guard's smoke break with obsessive precision, 9:30 a.m. Every single day. Like a liturgical rite, they emerged from the side employee entrance, lit their cigarettes, leaned against the granite, and talked. Ethan timed them from his driver's seat. Then later on days he finished his route early from discreet vantage points across the street. A shadowed doorway, the corner of an adjacent building. 7 minutes. Sometimes a few seconds over, never under 7 minutes. Where that entrance, though locked, was unwatched from the outside. A consistent, exploitable gap in the armor. He studied the choreography of the employee entrance. He watched Olivia Vance again, and others too. Swipe card, green light, insert secondary key, click enter. The door, heavy and hydraulic, would begin its slow, controlled closure. Ethan timed this too, focusing intently. 7 seconds. From the moment the employee cleared the threshold until the heavy thump of the door sealing shut. 7 seconds. A narrow window, but potentially wide enough for a shadow to glide through unnoticed, right behind someone legitimate. The delivery routines at the rear entrance continued to intrigue him. He saw different drivers, different trucks, different bank employees signing off. The common thread was the speed, the almost casual acceptance of packages. Rarely did he see anyone verify contents against a manifest or give more than a cursory check. It spoke of trust, of routine, bordering on complacency. Another potential weakness filed away in his mental dossier. One afternoon, after completing his shift, Ethan didn't head straight home. Instead, he parked the bus at the depot and doubled back towards the bank. On foot, shedding his uniform jacket for an anonymous windbreaker, pulling a baseball cap low over his eyes. He needed to see the bank's rhythm from ground level outside the context of his route. He found a bench across the street, partially obscured by a large planter, and simply watched. He saw the mid-morning lulls, the lunchtime rushes at the main entrance. He watched employees step out for coffee, badges clipped to their belts or bags. He saw security guards patrolling the perimeter, but their focus seemed directed towards the public-facing areas, not the mundane employee side door or the utilitarian rear entrance. At precisely 9:30 a.m. the next morning, from his bus, he watched the guards emerge for their break. 7 minutes later that day, on foot, again, he observed the side door. An employee entered. Ethan counted silently. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi. The door clicked shut. Enough time, he saw another delivery arrive at the rear. Quick sign-off packages whisked inside the patterns held. A cold confidence began to build within him, layer by layer. The bank's security, so imposing from the outside, seemed riddled with small vulnerabilities born of human habit and predictability. The routines, the schedules, the brief moments of inattention, they were the cracks he could potentially exploit. The idea no longer felt like a wild fantasy. It felt like a complex problem, waiting for the right solution. But observing was one thing, acting was another. He knew the risks were immense. He had no criminal record, no experience with break-ins or theft beyond shoplifting. A candy bar as a teenager. Failure wasn't just possible, it was probable. Yet the alternative, decades more of the same gray routine, the same quiet desperation, seemed like a different kind of failure. He left the vicinity of the bank that afternoon, feeling not exhilarated, but determined. He had confirmed the weaknesses. He had identified the window. Now he needed the key. Not the small metal key Olivia Vance used for the secondary lock, but the plastic one, the access card. The first most crucial barrier. How could he get past that? The question hung in the air as he walked back towards the bus depot, melting back into the anonymity of the city streets. The reconnaissance phase was yielding results. The planning phase was about to begin in earnest. The employee access card. It became an obsession, the focal point of Ethan's meticulous planning. Everything hinged on it. Observing vulnerabilities was one thing. Bypassing the primary layer of electronic security was the real challenge. How could he get his hands on one, even for a few seconds? And more importantly, how could he copy it without leaving a trace, without alerting anyone? His evenings transformed. The small apartment, usually filled with the drone of the television or the silence of solitude, became a makeshift research center. Hunched over a cheap laptop bought secondhand, Ethan delved into the world of magnetic stripe technology, access, control systems, and card cloning. He learned about track data, encoding formats, and the surprisingly accessible tools used to read and write information onto magnetic stripes. Public library computers offered anonymous browse portals into forums and technical websites. He absorbed the information methodically, piecing together what he needed. The answer, it seemed, lay in a small handheld device, a portable magnetic stripe reader-writer. The purchase itself was an exercise in anonymity. He chose a large impersonal hardware superstore on the other side of town. Miles from his usual routes, he paid cash for a compact MSR device, barely making eye contact with the bored cashier. The small black gadget felt heavy in his hand, humming with illicit potential. Back in the sterile quiet of his apartment, he practiced using expired credit cards, old hotel keys, even his library card. He learned the device's quirks, the satisfying zip as the card slid through the reader, the soft glow of the indicator light confirming data, capture the process of writing that data onto a blank card. Each successful test built his confidence, transforming the abstract technical knowledge into practical skill. His movements became fluid, economical fast. His target remained Olivia Vance. Her slight habitual disorganization made her the most likely candidate. He remembered how loosely the card had dangled from her bag that day, how easily it had slipped from her pocket. He began tailoring his post-shift observations, discreetly tracking her routine beyond the morning commute. He discovered she frequented a small, bustling cafe near the bank for lunch several times a week. It was perfect. Crowded enough for anonymity, predictable enough for planning. The following Tuesday, Ethan positioned himself at the cafe well before lunchtime. He chose a corner table partially obscured by a faux plant, but offering a clear view of the entrance and the counter area. He nursed a single cup of coffee, pretending to read a newspaper, his senses on high alert. When Olivia walked in, right on schedule, his heart hammered against his ribs. She claimed a nearby table, tossing her handbag and jacket onto the adjacent chair before heading to the counter to order. And there it was, just as he'd hoped, just as he'd observed her do before. The key card, still attached to its lanyard, had slipped partially out of a side pocket of the bag, resting tantalizingly on the fabric of the chair. His moment had arrived. The cafe buzzed around him, chatter clinking cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, providing a perfect screen of ambient noise. As Olivia stood with her back to her table, waiting for her sandwich, Ethan moved. It felt like stepping outside of time. Smoothly, he rose, pretending to stretch. In one fluid motion, he leaned towards her chair, as if adjusting his own fingers, closing around the keycard. His portable scanner, concealed in his jacket pocket, was ready. A quick, practiced swipe. Zip. The card slid through the reader, hidden within his palm. He immediately placed the card back exactly where it had been angled, just so, against the bag's fabric. The entire operation took less than 5 seconds. His hands were steady, his face impassive, but adrenaline screamed through his veins like an electric current. Olivia returned to her table, sandwich in hand, completely oblivious. She tucked the errant keycard back into her bag with a casual flick of her wrist. Ethan took a slow sip of his now cold coffee, forcing himself to remain calm, to breathe normally. He lingered for another 10 minutes, finishing his coffee, scanning the newspaper before quietly getting up and leaving the cafe. Outside on the bustling sidewalk, the surge of triumph was almost overwhelming. The riskiest, most technically demanding part of his plan was done. He had the data. He had the key to Keystone National Bank captured silently, invisibly, from right under his target's nose. Back in the suffocating privacy of his apartment, the captured data felt like a burning ember in Ethan's pocket. He retrieved the MSR device and a blank white plastic card, identical in appearance to Olivia Vance's, with meticulous care. Following the steps he'd practiced countless times, he connected the device to his laptop and initiated the writing sequence. The soft whir of the machine, transferring the invisible stream of ones and zeros onto the blank card's magnetic stripe, was the only sound in the room, a quiet counterpoint to the frantic pounding in his chest. Success. He now held a perfect electronic clone of a Keystone National Bank employee access card. He couldn't risk testing it on the bank itself yet, but he ran diagnostic checks on the data structure using software he'd found online. Everything matched. He even rigged up an old magnetic card reader scavenged from a defunct point-of-sale terminal. The duplicate card registered mimicking the electronic handshake it should perform at the bank's door. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough. Confidence surged cold and sharp. Now, the abstract plan needed to become a precise blueprint. Ethan spread his notes and crude sketches across his small kitchen table, timings, routes, observations, all distilled into a sequence of actions. Entry 32. Precisely 2 minutes into the guard's confirmed 7-minute smoke break, 9:37 a.m. Approach the side employee entrance. Swipe the duplicate card. Navigation. Proceed swiftly down the known corridor. Avoid the main lobby camera sightlines. Utilize the short hallway leading towards the rear, towards the vault area. Duck into the small storage closet identified during reconnaissance. If any unexpected sounds are heard, vault access reach the vault door. Enter the 6-digit code overheard from the managers 714263. Address the secondary physical lock. He'd observed it closely. It looked like a standard older wafer lock. He'd acquired a set of simple wafer lock picks and practiced on similar locks at home. It was a risk, but seemed less complex than the electronic systems. The hall, enter the vault. Focus on $100 bill bundles. Maximum value, minimum bulk. Fill the backpack methodically. Estimate 10 to 15 minutes, max inside. Exit. Retrace steps carefully. Exit via the employee side door before 9:55 a.m. Well before any shift changes or increased mid-morning activity. Blend into the street. He considered the variables. What if the guards cut their break short? What if someone else used the corridor unexpectedly? What if the code had been changed? For each risk, he devised a simple contingency. Abort if the guards returned early. Use the storage closet for temporary concealment. If the code failed, the attempt was over. Retreat immediately. No heroics, no improvisation if the plan derailed. The final preparations were minimal deliberate. A pair of thin, tight-fitting leather gloves to leave no fingerprints. A small, powerful LED flashlight. The newly acquired set of wafer lockpicks and a tension wrench. The duplicate keycard wiped clean and handled only with gloves, and a sturdy, nondescript black backpack. large enough to hold the target amount comfortable enough to carry without drawing attention. He dressed in dark, unremarkable clothing. Jeans, a plain hoodie, comfortable sneakers, nothing that screamed criminal, just blending into the urban gray. Night after night, lying awake in bed, he rehearsed the entire sequence in his mind. The walk to the bank, the approach to the door, the swipe of the card, the steps down the corridor, the manipulation of the locks, the feel of the cash, the walk away. He visualized every camera angle he'd noted, every potential blind spot, every turn, every second. He committed it all to memory until it felt less like a plan and more like a recollection. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by a powerful driving sense of control, of purpose. He felt like he was finally taking the wheel of his own life, steering it away from the dead end it had become. He set his alarm for 4:30 a.m. The heist was set for the following morning. There was no turning back now. The shrill buzz of the cheap alarm clock at 4:34 a.m. sliced through the pre-dawn stillness. Ethan Cole didn't hit snooze. He rose immediately, a coiled spring of carefully controlled tension. The hours of shallow, restless sleep vanished, replaced by sharp focus. He moved with deliberate slowness, pulling on the dark jeans, the plain black hoodie, the worn sneakers, a final check of the backpack gloves, flashlight, lockpicks. Tension wrenched the duplicate keycard nestled in its own compartment. Everything was there. He pulled a nondescript baseball cap low over his face. Ready, he slipped out of his apartment building before 5:15 a.m., melting into the still sleeping city. He navigated a web of side streets and alleys he'd meticulously mapped, avoiding main thoroughfares, staying clear of early morning joggers and the reach of known security cameras. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp concrete and exhaust fumes. Each step was measured, purposeful, taking him closer to the point of no return. By 5:45 a.m., he was settled in the shadows of an alleyway across from Keystone National Bank, partially concealed by a row of overflowing dumpsters. From here, he had a clear, oblique view of the employee side entrance. He settled in to wait. The city slowly stirring around him, the sky gradually lightening from black to bruised purple to a steely gray. Time stretched, measured in the anxious thrum of his own pulse. He watched the bank's lights flicker on. The first few employees arrive using the main entrance. Then closer to 9:30 a.m., the familiar figures of the two morning security guards appeared inside, visible through the glass panels flanking the main doors. Ethan tensed. 9:30 a.m. On the dot. The side employee door opened, and the two guards stepped out, pulling cigarettes from their pockets almost in unison. Their casual laughter echoed faintly in the quiet street as they leaned against the wall. Ethan started the stopwatch function on his wristwatch, the cheap plastic cool against his skin despite the adrenaline warming him from the inside. The 7-minute window had begun. He waited 2 full minutes, an eternity, letting them settle into their break, ensuring no one else was immediately entering or exiting. Then, at 9:32 a.m., he moved. Emerging from the alley, he walked briskly, head down across the street towards the employee entrance. No hesitation. He reached the door, the duplicate key card already in his gloved hand. The swipe through the reader felt unnaturally loud in the silence. An agonizing second passed, then a soft click, and the small indicator light flashed green. Relief washed over him, sharp and dizzying. He pushed the heavy door inward, just enough to slip through, pulling it gently closed behind him until it latched with a muted thump. He was inside the hallway stretched before him, sterile, silent, bathed in the cold, humming glow of fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and old paper. Exactly as he remembered from his reconnaissance, he moved quickly, silently down the corridor, his sneakers making no sound on the polished linoleum. He passed beneath the unblinking eyes of two surveillance cameras, knowing they were likely recording, but not actively monitored unless an alarm was triggered. He reached the small storage closet near the turn towards the vault corridor. Heart pounding, he slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving just a crack to peer through. He stood in the cramped darkness, enveloped by the smell of disinfectant and dusty spare uniforms, listening intently. He heard the faint murmur of the guards' voices outside as their break ended around 9:37 a.m. Their footsteps receded down a different hallway. He waited another 3 excruciating minutes in the cramped closet, straining his ears, ensuring the corridor outside remained utterly silent. Satisfied, he eased the closet door open and slipped back out. Now, the final approach. Down the short hallway towards the vault. The air felt heavier here, colder. The vault door loomed at the end, a slab of impenetrable steel, keypad on the right secondary lock below it. He took a deep breath, pulling the numbers from his memory. 7, 1, 4, 2, 6, 3. His gloved fingers punched the code onto the keypad. Each press felt deliberate, final. The small display flashed green. Another lock clicked open, louder this time. He quickly took out the lock picks and tension wrench. He inserted the wrench into the wafer lock, applying slight turning pressure, then delicately probed the wafers with a pick. He'd practiced this, but his hands trembled slightly now. A faint click, then another. Nothing. He adjusted the tension, tried again. Click, click, click. The cylinder turned. A wave of triumph quickly suppressed. He pulled the heavy vault door open. Inside it was exactly as he'd imagined, yet utterly surreal. Racks lined with cash, bundles upon bundles, secured with paper bands, stacked neatly on metal shelves, mostly hundreds. The sheer volume of it stole his breath for a second. He stepped inside the door, sighing softly behind him. He pulled the backpack off his shoulders, opened the main compartment wide. Then methodically, purposefully, he began to transfer the cash bundle after bundle, stacking them tightly, efficiently, maximizing the space. The only sounds were the rustle of the paper bands and his own ragged breathing. He filled the main compartment, zipped it, then started on the secondary pockets. He worked quickly, mechanically. His mind focused solely on the task, occasionally pausing to listen to the profound silence of the vault. The backpack grew heavy, straining his shoulders. It was full. $2 million or close enough. He zipped the backpack completely, hefted its significant weight onto his back. He took one last, sweeping look around the vault, ensuring he'd left nothing disturbed, nothing except the missing cash. Then, turning his back on the fortune, he nudged the massive steel door, leaving it purposefully slightly ajar. A small variance in the routine that might buy him precious extra time. The riskiest part was done. Now he just had to get out. Backpack heavy adrenaline still singing in his ears. Ethan moved with controlled urgency back through the silent corridors. Every footstep seemed to echo, every distant sound amplified. He stuck to the route he'd memorized, keeping his head down, avoiding any potential line of sight from intersecting hallways. The weight on his back was a constant physical reminder of the immense risk he'd taken, the reality of the $2 million pressing down on him. He reached the employee side door, the final barrier between the sterile interior and the anonymous freedom of the street. He paused, listening intently for a few seconds. Silence. He raised the duplicate keycard one last time. His gloved hand steady, despite the tremor deep inside the swipe, the familiar green light, the soft click. He pushed the door open just enough and slipped outside into the bright mid-morning air. It was 9:56 a.m. He let the door click shut behind him, resisting the powerful urge to sprint away to look back over his shoulder. Instead, he forced himself into a steady, unremarkable walking pace, merging seamlessly into the flow of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Just another face in the crowd, backpack slung over his shoulder. Every nerve ending screamed danger. But his outward appearance was deliberately, painstakingly normal. He didn't head directly towards his rented garage. He took an indirect route, weaving through streets bustling with mid-morning activity, putting distance and several random turns between himself and Keystone National Bank. The sun felt warm on his face, a stark contrast to the artificial chill of the bank's interior. The weight of the backpack seemed to grow with every block, a tangible burden of his new secret. Finally, nearly 30 minutes later, he arrived at the quiet, slightly dilapidated industrial park on the edge of town. He approached the row of identical rented garages, glancing around casually, ensuring no one was watching. He unlocked Unit 14, rented weeks ago, under a meticulously crafted false name and paid for in cash, and quickly stepped inside, pulling the rolling door down behind him. The sudden dimness and the smell of dust oil and concrete felt like a sanctuary. He leaned against the closed door for a moment, breathing heavily, letting the adrenaline begin to subside. Then he moved to the workbench against the far wall and swung the heavy backpack onto it. He unzipped the main compartment. The sight of the stacked cash, improbable and overwhelming, hit him again. It was real. He had done it, working quickly. Now how? He transferred the bundles of cash from the backpack into a heavy-duty steel lockbox he had previously hidden beneath a loose floor panel in the corner. He arranged the bundles tightly inside, the sheer volume filling the box almost completely. He secured the lid, locked it, and carefully replaced the floor panel, scattering some dust and debris over it to complete the camouflage. The money was secure. Next, the evidence. He peeled off the tight leather gloves, stuffing them into a cheap plastic grocery bag. The duplicate keycard followed along with the small set of lockpicks and the tension wrench. He wiped down the workbench, the lockbox, the doorknob, anything he might have touched, even with gloves. He folded the plastic bag tightly. He took one last look around the dusty, anonymous space, then slipped back out, locking the garage securely behind him. The disposal process required patience and geographic separation. He walked several blocks casually, dropping the folded plastic bag containing the gloves into a crowded public trash bin in a small park. Miles later, near a busy gas station on the other side of town, he nonchalantly tossed the duplicate keycard, now wiped clean of any prints, into another overflowing bin. The lockpicks and wrench met a similar fate in a third bin near a bus transfer point even further away. Each item discarded separately, swallowed by the city's vast waste stream, making them virtually untraceable and impossible to link together. By the time he had disposed of the last piece of incriminating evidence, it was early afternoon. The sun was high. The city pulsed with lunchtime energy. Ethan Cole, now just a man walking down the street, felt a profound sense of release, quickly tempered by the understanding that this was only the end of the beginning. The money was hidden. The tools were gone. But the most challenging part, living with the secret maintaining the facade, avoiding detection, lay ahead. He headed back towards his apartment, ready to shower change and meticulously erase any remaining physical connection to the morning's extraordinary events. Back within the familiar drab walls of his apartment, Ethan Cole moved with the deliberate calm of a surgeon after a complex operation. He locked the door behind him, the deadbolt sliding home with a reassuring thunk. First, a long, hot shower, scrubbing away the grime of the city streets and, metaphorically, the residue of the morning's illicit activities. He changed into a fresh set of unremarkable clothes, worn jeans, a faded t-shirt. The dark hoodie sneakers and other garments worn during the heist went straight into the laundry basket. He made a mental note to wash them separately on a hot cycle. He stood before the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on his face. The reflection that stared back was familiar, yet subtly altered. His eyes, usually dull with routine, held a new sharp alertness hidden deep beneath a carefully maintained surface of weary normalcy. He forced his breathing to slow, consciously, relaxing the tension coiled in his shoulders. He made coffee, the familiar ritual grounding him, then sat at his small kitchen table, flipping idly through a day-old newspaper. To any observer, he was simply a man unwinding after a long walk, perhaps contemplating his next shift. His bus route, his unwavering schedule, that was his shield, his alibi. He would perform his role flawlessly. Later that afternoon, as Ethan was perhaps navigating the familiar afternoon traffic on his bus route, or maybe just watching mind-numbing television, if it was his day off, a different kind of drama was unfolding across town at Keystone National Bank around 3:30 p.m. During a routine end-of-day cash audit, a junior teller double-checked. A figure frowned and checked again. The numbers didn't add up, not by a few dollars, but by an astronomical amount. He alerted his supervisor. Panic, initially suppressed, began to ripple through the management team like an electric current. A senior manager, keys trembling slightly, went to verify the vault's contents firsthand. He found the massive steel door, not securely sealed, but pushed almost shut, left slightly ajar. Inside, the emptiness hit him like a physical blow. Shelves that should have been groaning under the weight of cash were bare. $2 million gone. Chaos erupted. Phones rang unanswered as managers scrambled, demanding recounts, reviewing transaction logs, pulling internal surveillance feeds. The slightly ajar vault door was a chilling detail, suggesting not a brute force attack, but potentially an inside job, or someone who knew the systems intimately. Security protocols kicked into high gear. The bank was placed on immediate lockdown. Local police were notified, sirens wailing in the distance, converging on the imposing granite building. Detectives arrived, their faces grim, setting up a preliminary command post in a conference room. Employees were sequestered, questioned one by one, their faces masks of bewilderment and fear. The initial review of surveillance footage was maddeningly fruitless. Cameras covering hallways showed routine movements, but no masked intruders, no suspicious figures lurking near the vault corridor during the estimated time frame. The ghost had left no image behind. Meanwhile, miles away, Ethan Cole finished his bus route, if he was working, returning the vehicle to the depot. He clocked out, exchanged a few meaningless pleasantries with a coworker about the weather, and walked home his stride, even his expression unreadable, back in his apartment around 6:45 p.m. He reheated a simple, pre-made dinner. He turned on the television, flipping through channels waiting. He knew it was only a matter of time before the story broke. The storm had hit Keystone National. His carefully constructed plan had held. For now, he was safe, hidden behind the impenetrable wall of his own ordinary life. The investigation had begun, but they were searching for a ghost. The Keystone National Bank heist dominated the local news cycle for days. Headlines screamed about the ghost robbery, the untraceable $2 million. News channels ran speculative segments interviewing former bank security experts and armchair detectives. Theories flew thick and fast. Disgruntled insiders, sophisticated international crime rings, lone wolves with unparalleled skills. Ethan Cole absorbed it all from the detached safety of his living room couch, or the driver's seat of his bus, listening intently to the radio reports between stops. He watched the news footage of police cars outside the bank, grim-faced detectives giving curt, no comments, anxious-looking bank employees leaving the building. The phrase insider knowledge was frequently mentioned, confirming his expectation that the police would suspect someone familiar with the bank's operations. It was predictable. What mattered was the lack of specifics. No suspects named. No tangible evidence reported. Life for Ethan had to remain utterly, painstakingly normal. He woke at the same time, drove the same route, endured the same traffic. The bus itself became a strange echo chamber. Passengers, emboldened by the headlines, openly discussed the robbery. Theories were debated. Admiration for the thief's audacity was grudgingly expressed. Fears about bank security were voiced. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, offering non-committal grunts or brief, neutral responses if drawn into conversation. Hard to believe, he might murmur or hope they catch whoever did it. At the bus depot, his coworkers were buzzing jokes about who might have the missing cash, speculation about professional crews versus an inside job. Ethan joined in, briefly carefully mirroring their casual tones, ensuring his own contributions were bland and forgettable. His routine was his armor, his anonymity, his shield. Meanwhile, the official investigation crawled forward, hampered by the sheer lack of evidence. Detectives meticulously reviewed weeks of surveillance footage from the bank and surrounding businesses, hoping for a glimpse of someone out of place, but found nothing conclusive. Forensic teams scoured the vault and the employee entrance area, dusting for prints, searching for fibers, hairs, anything. But Ethan had been meticulous. Gloves, no forced entry, minimal disturbance. The initial reports showed no usable prints matching anyone on file or any current employees. Frustration Mounted at police headquarters, Keystone National, under pressure, drastically increased security. More cameras, stricter access protocols, mandatory escorts for maintenance crews. Ethan learned about these changes through the grumbling conversations of the bank employees still riding his bus. He listened impassively. Days bled into weeks. The initial media saturation faded, replaced by newer headlines. The city moved on. But for Ethan, the pressure remained a constant low hum beneath the surface of his enforced normalcy. Every police car passed felt like a potential scrutiny. Every news report on unsolved crimes sparked a flicker of anxiety. He found himself replaying the heist in his mind during quiet moments. The swipe of the card, the walk down the corridor. The feel of the lock picks the weight of the bag. Had he missed anything? Overlooked a camera? Left some infinitesimal trace? The $2 million sat untouched in its steel box beneath the floor of the rented garage, a silent promise of future freedom, but also a source of persistent gnawing tension. He resisted the urge to check on the money or to start spending even the smallest amounts. Patience and discipline, he reminded himself, were key. His success so far was built on blending in, on being the unremarkable man no one looked at twice. Any deviation from his routine, any unusual expenditure could attract unwanted attention. He continued his shifts, ate his simple meals, watched television, paid his bills. He lived the same life as before. Yet everything had changed. He was a man living a double existence, the secret weighing on him constantly, the quiet desperation replaced by a quiet vigilance. The ghost of Keystone National Bank was for now successfully haunting the periphery, leaving no trace but the lingering question: who could have done it? Ok, đây là Fan 10 đánh dấu sự chuyển biến khi cuộc điều tra bắt đầu tập trung hơn và Ethan lần đầu đối mặt với sự nghi ngờ trực tiếp. Fan Day. Months crawled by. Summer arrived, coating the city in a thick blanket of heat and humidity. The Keystone National Bank heist, while not forgotten, had lost its immediacy, relegated to the occasional cold case mention in the local paper. Ethan Cole had settled into a tense rhythm, his life governed by routine and hypervigilance. The initial storm seemed to have passed. He allowed himself a sliver of hope that perhaps he had pulled it off. Then came the first tremor. A small article buried deep in the Metro section. Police, expanding their investigation, were meticulously reviewing surveillance footage from businesses surrounding Keystone National, hoping to identify anyone present in the area during the early morning hours of the robbery day. Ethan froze, reading it, coffee halfway to his lips. Had his pre-dawn walk to the observation alley taken him past any of those cameras? Had he been careless, his face visible under the brim of his cap in a stray reflection? The net previously cast wide and seemingly ineffective felt like it might be tightening slowly, imperceptibly. A week later, another jolt. An unfamiliar, dark sedan with heavily tinted windows appeared on his street, parked halfway down the block from his apartment building. It sat there for hours, silent, inscrutable. Ethan watched it from behind his blinds, his stomach churning. It was there again 2 days later. Coincidence, or something more? No one approached him. No one seemed to be watching overtly, but the car's presence felt like a silent accusation. amplifying his paranoia. He started varying his routes to and from the bus depot, checking his rearview mirror, constantly seeing potential surveillance in every idling car. Then came the news report that truly rattled him. Police announced they had recovered partial fingerprints from an interior doorframe near the vault corridor, prints that didn't match any bank employees or known criminals in their database. Unidentified, Ethan knew logically they couldn't be his. He'd worn gloves religiously from the moment he approached the bank door until after he'd secured the cash in the garage. Yet the news gnawed at him. Had he brushed against something inadvertently before pulling on the gloves in the alley? Had a stray fiber clung to his clothes? Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep into the edges of his carefully constructed confidence. The inevitable arrived on a crisp September morning just after dawn. A sharp, authoritative knock on his apartment door shattered the morning quiet. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat. He peered through the peephole. Two men dressed in plain clothes, but radiating an unmistakable air of law enforcement, stood patiently in the hallway. He opened the door, schooling his features into mild, sleepy confusion. "Yes, Mir Ethan Cole." The taller of the two asked, his voice neutral, professional. "Speaking, Detectives Miller and Shaw City Police," the man said briefly, flashing a badge. "We'd like to ask you a few questions down at the station regarding the Keystone National Bank robbery back in the spring. Would you mind coming with us?" Ethan's mind raced, but his voice remained steady. "The bank robbery, why me?" "Your bus route takes you past the bank daily, Mr. Cole," Detective Miller explained calmly. "Bus company logs confirm you were working and in the vicinity on the morning in question. We're speaking to several individuals who were routinely in the area, potential witnesses, just clearing the decks. Standard procedure." It sounded plausible, almost routine, but Ethan knew it wasn't. "They were here," he forced a nod. "Okay, sure, let me just grab my keys." Cooperation was the only play. Refusal would scream guilt. The walk down the hallway, the ride in the unmarked police car, passed in a haze of suppressed panic and forced nonchalance. The interrogation room was small beige and smelled faintly of stale coffee. Miller and Shaw were polite, almost friendly, but their eyes were sharp, missing nothing. They went over his schedule, his route, his timings for the day of the robbery. Did he see anything unusual? Anyone suspicious? Did he know any of the bank employees personally? Ethan stuck to his script. He drove his route. He saw the usual morning activity. He knew some employees by sight as regular passengers. Nothing more. He offered his bus logs, his timesheets. They asked about his finances, his background. He answered truthfully. Single, no dependents, lived paycheck to paycheck like most people. He kept his answers simple, direct, volunteering, nothing extra. He watched their faces, trying to gauge their reactions, revealing nothing himself. Hours passed. The questions circled, sometimes repeating, probing for inconsistencies. They had nothing concrete. He could feel it. No smoking gun. But they were looking at him. Finally, late in the afternoon, they let him go. "Thanks for your cooperation, Mr. Cole. We'll be in touch if we need anything else." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. Relief washed over Ethan as he stepped out of the police station into the afternoon sun. But it was a fragile, temporary relief. He had survived the first direct encounter. But the shield of anonymity was gone. They knew his name, they had his face. He was no longer just a ghost in the machine. He was officially on the police radar. The game had changed. The months following the interrogation bled into one another, marked by a tense, watchful quiet. Autumn faded. Winter settled over the city, and the Keystone National Bank heist slowly cooled in the public consciousness. Ethan Cole clung to his routine like a lifeline. He drove his bus, paid his bills, kept his head down. The suspicious sedan disappeared from his street. No further word came from Detectives Miller and Shaw. A fragile hope began to bloom in the desolate landscape of his anxiety. Perhaps they truly had nothing. Perhaps the sheer audacity and meticulous planning had been enough, but the investigation, while out of the headlines, hadn't died. It had simply gone deeper, grinding away with the slow, relentless persistence of police work. Detectives pored over maps, cross-referencing Ethan's known bus routes and potential travel paths on the day of the heist with city sanitation records and landfill manifests. It was a long shot, tedious work following the faintest trails based on behavioral patterns and educated guesses about evidence disposal. Then deep within the reeking mountains of compacted refuse at a landfill site, miles from the city center, a sanitation worker sorting through debris flagged an unusual item found near a sector corresponding to collection routes Ethan might have crossed after the heist timeframe. It was tiny, barely noticeable, a jagged shard of white plastic, partially heat-warped, smaller than a fingernail. Ordinarily, it would have been ignored, lost forever in the overwhelming tide of garbage. But this piece had a faint, almost invisible line running across it. The barest hint of a magnetic stripe procedure demanded anything potentially unusual be set aside. The fragment eventually landed on a desk in the police forensic lab. Under magnification, the faint line was confirmed as part of a magnetic stripe. More sophisticated analysis revealed trace elements in the plastic composite, consistent with batches used for high-security access cards. Crucially, microscopic remnants of data structure, though heavily corrupted, hinted at an encoding format used by specific access control systems, including the one recently upgraded at Keystone National Bank. It wasn't a fingerprint. It wasn't a confession. But it was the break they desperately needed. A physical piece of evidence deliberately discarded far from the crime scene directly linked to the bank's security system. The focus snapped back instantly to Ethan Cole. The quiet bus driver who was near the scene, who had been questioned, who fit no typical criminal profile, but possessed intimate knowledge of the bank's exterior routines. The discovery of the card fragment miles away suggested a level of planning and a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence that elevated him from a person of interest to the prime suspect. It was the linchpin the district attorney needed. Circumstantial, yes, but compelling enough for a warrant. The end came swiftly, clinically, on a cold morning in late February. Ethan was just pouring his first cup of coffee when the knock came. Sharper, more insistent than before. He knew even before looking through the peephole. Who it was, Detectives Miller and Shaw stood there again, but their expressions were different now. No more professional courtesy, just grim determination. Ethan Cole, Miller stated, not a question this time. You're under arrest for the burglary and theft at Keystone National Bank. He produced the warrant. There was no room for argument, no point in feigned surprise. A strange sense of calm, bordering on resignation, washed over Ethan. The long, tense wait was finally over. Detectives searched his apartment, meticulously confiscating notebooks filled with mundane observations that now seemed incriminating: his work backpack, bus route schedules, his old laptop. They didn't find the money. It remained safe miles away. But they didn't seem surprised. They had their man anchored by a tiny piece of plastic pulled from a mountain of trash. Ethan offered no resistance as they handcuffed him, the cold metal clicking shut around his wrists, a sound far louder and more final than any vault lock. He was escorted out of his apartment building, past startled neighbors peering from their doorways, and placed into the back of the waiting police car. The ghost had been caught not in a hail of bullets or a dramatic showdown, but by the patient sifting of garbage and the unblinking memory of a magnetic stripe fragment. The meticulous plan had been undone by a single overlooked piece of trash. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Months passed between Ethan Cole's arrest and the start of his trial. Held in custody, unable to afford bail or a high-priced lawyer, he was assigned a public defender, an earnest, overworked young woman who listened patiently to his quiet insistence of innocence. Ethan stuck to his story. He drove his bus route. He saw nothing. The fragment was meaningless, coincidence. But the prosecution felt they had enough. The circumstantial evidence, anchored by the keycard fragment, painted a compelling, if incomplete, picture. The trial began on a cold January morning. The courtroom was hushed, expectant. Ethan sat beside his lawyer, dressed in borrowed clothes, appearing calm, almost detached. He watched the proceedings with the same quiet intensity he used to watch the city streets, observing the judge, the jury, the lawyers presenting their cases. The prosecution laid out its argument methodically. They established Ethan's undisputed opportunity, his daily route logs, placing his bus near Keystone National during the critical window. They presented testimony from co-workers who noted Ethan had seemed unusually withdrawn and quiet in the weeks following the robbery. Subtle behavioral shifts suggesting psychological strain. They emphasized the nature of the crime itself, the lack of forced entry, the apparent knowledge of security, routines like the guards break, the precision timing, all pointing towards someone with intimate observational knowledge rather than brute force. Someone exactly like Ethan. Then came the linchpin, the keycard fragment. Forensic experts testified about its composition, its link to the bank's specific security system. Detectives described its discovery miles away, arguing it was irrefutable proof of someone deliberately destroying evidence directly related to accessing the bank. Evidence only the thief would possess and have reason to discard so carefully. They didn't claim Ethan's fingerprints were on it, but argued its mere existence, found discarded along a plausible escape route, pointed overwhelmingly towards him. The defense fought back, attacking the circumstantial nature of the case. They highlighted the lack of direct evidence, no eyewitnesses, no fingerprints linking Ethan to the scene, and crucially, none of the $2 million ever recovered. They argued Ethan's presence near the bank was simply part of his job. The behavioral changes were subjective, open to interpretation. The key card fragment, a random piece of trash. Its connection, purely speculative. Its discovery, potentially coincidental. They hammered on the concept of reasonable doubt. Could the jury be certain beyond any reasonable doubt that this quiet bus driver was capable of planning and executing such a sophisticated heist based solely on these fragments of evidence? Ethan watched the jury intently during their deliberation. Their faces were unreadable. When they filed back into the courtroom, the air crackled with tension. The four persons stood, On the charge of burglary, we find the defendant Ethan Cole. A pause that stretched for an eternity. Guilty. Another pause. On the charge of theft, we find the defendant Ethan Cole. Guilty. A collective gasp went through the courtroom gallery. Ethan felt a strange numbness spread through him. There was no outburst, no visible shock on his face, just a quiet absorption of the inevitable. His public defender placed a comforting hand on his arm, but he barely registered it. Sentencing followed. The judge, stern-faced, spoke of the calculated nature of the crime, the significant financial loss, and the disruption and fear caused to the bank's employees and the community's sense of security. He noted the lack of remorse shown by the defendant. Despite the defense's pleas for leniency based on Ethan's clean prior record, the sentence was harsh. 15 years in state prison. 15 years, the number echoed in the silent courtroom. Ethan Cole stood flanked by court officers. The meticulous planning, the perfect execution, the careful disposal of evidence, all undone by a microscopic fragment of plastic, and the persuasive power of circumstantial connections. As he was led out of the courtroom towards the transport vehicle that would take him to begin his sentence, his face remained an impassive mask. The gamble had failed. The price was due. The transition from the anonymous freedom of the city streets to the suffocating confinement of state prison was brutal, jarring. The clang of steel doors, the constant noise, the harsh lights that never fully dimmed, the loss of identity replaced by an inmate number. It was a world designed to break a man down. But Ethan Cole, ever the observer, ever the adapter, didn't break. He simply adjusted his strategy. He quickly realized that survival lay in invisibility, a skill he had honed over years behind the wheel. He kept to himself, spoke only when necessary, avoided eye contact, steered clear of prison politics and gang affiliations. He was polite to guards, respectful to fellow inmates, but formed no close bonds. He became a ghost within the gray prison walls, just as he had been a ghost on the city streets. He learned the routines, the rhythms, the unspoken rules of this new brutal environment. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The monotony was soul-crushing. Yet Ethan found an anchor. The secret knowledge of the $2 million hidden securely beneath the floor of that dusty garage. It was his lifeline, the one part of his gamble that had paid off the ultimate ace up his sleeve during the long, empty hours in his cell, or while working quietly in the prison library sorting books. His mind would return to it. He replayed the successful execution of the heist, not searching for flaws anymore, but savoring the moments of control, the feeling of outsmarting the system, if only temporarily. The money wasn't just wealth. It was proof that he could act, that he wasn't solely defined by the mundane routine the world saw. It was his reason to endure, to serve his time quietly and without incident. He read voraciously, using the library access to educate himself, to pass the endless hours. He observed the dynamics of prison life with the same detached curiosity he'd once applied to the bank employees, learning about human nature under duress. He followed the rules, kept his record clean, never caused trouble. He was the model inmate, quiet, cooperative, unremarkable. And so the years passed. 1, 2, 3. 6. His clean record and good behavior earned him parole eligibility much sooner than his full 15-year sentence implied. The parole board saw a quiet, rehabilitated man who had paid his debt, presenting no further threat. They granted his release. 6 years. He had entered prison, a middle-aged man, burdened by quiet desperation. He would leave slightly older, grayer, marked by the experience, but with a core of unwavering purpose that had sustained him through the bleakness. As his release date approached, a new kind of focus sharpened within him. He thought about the world outside, how much had changed in 6 years. He thought about the garage, the steel box, the $2 million waiting patiently. The final act of his long game was about to begin. Prison had been an unexpected, harsh intermission, but the story wasn't over yet. The prison gates clanked shut behind him, a sound both final and liberating. Ethan Cole stood for a moment, blinking in the unfamiliar brightness of the outside world. 6 years. The air felt different, cleaner, thinner. Cars on the nearby highway looked sleeker, faster. People hurried past, faces buried in small glowing devices he barely recognized. The world hadn't waited. He took a deep breath, the first truly free breath in over 2,000 days, but his focus remained laser sharp. One thought anchored him: the money. He didn't linger. He knew parole often came with conditions, potential monitoring. He needed to be discreet, untraceable. Using a small amount of cash, meticulously saved from prison work and supplemented by funds wired discreetly from one of the few old trusted contacts who owed him a significant unspoken favor. He caught a series of local buses heading away from the prison town towards a larger, more anonymous city, hub several hours away. There, using identification documents he'd carefully arranged to be waiting for him, basic but functional enough for short-term use. He paid cash for a cheap, unremarkable rental car. No credit cards, no traceable transactions. He drove through the night, avoiding major highways where possible, sticking to quieter state routes. The darkness offered camouflage, the anonymity of the road a comfort. He watched the fuel gauge stopping only at isolated prepaid gas pumps. As he drove closer to the city where the garage lay hidden, a familiar tension coiled in his stomach, a mix of high-stakes anticipation and ingrained caution. He arrived on the outskirts of the industrial park well after midnight. He parked the rental car several blocks away on a dark side street, then proceeded on foot, carrying only a small flashlight and a sturdy, empty duffel bag. The industrial park was deserted, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of infrequent security lights. He moved through the shadows, senses on high alert, scanning the silent buildings, listening for any sound out of place. He circled Garage Unit 14 twice, checking for any signs of disturbance surveillance. Anything unusual? Nothing. It looked exactly as he'd left it 6 years ago. Dusty, neglected, forgotten. His hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he inserted the spare key, kept safe and hidden by his contact throughout his incarceration, into the lock. The mechanism turned with a rusty groan. He pushed the rolling door up just enough to slip underneath, then pulled it down silently behind him, plunging the interior into near-total darkness. He clicked on his small flashlight, its beam cutting through the thick, dusty air. The familiar smell of old oil, concrete, and decay filled his nostrils. He didn't hesitate. He went straight to the far corner, moved aside the stack of old tires he'd used as camouflage, and located the slightly uneven floor panel. Using a small pry bar he'd tucked into the duffel bag, he carefully lifted the panel, revealing the dark space beneath. And there it was, the steel lockbox, cold, heavy, solid. His heart hammered against his ribs. He produced another small key, also kept safe for him, and unlocked the box. The lid creaked open. Inside, illuminated by the narrow beam of his flashlight, lay the money, bundle after bundle of $100 bills, neatly stacked untouched by time or decay. The sight sent a wave of profound, almost overwhelming relief washing over him. It was real. It was still there. After everything, the planning, the risk, the arrest, the trial, the 6 years lost. This part, the core of it all, had remained secure. He worked quickly, transferring the bundles from the cold steel box into the waiting duffel bag. It filled rapidly, the bag becoming heavy, dense with wealth. He relocked the empty box, replaced the floor panel, carefully scattered dust over it, and rearranged the tires. He swept the flashlight beam around the garage one last time, ensuring he left no trace of his visit. He hefted the duffel bag, a significant life-altering weight, onto his shoulder, took a deep breath, and exited the garage, pulling the door down and locking it securely. Back in the rental car, the duffel bag heavy on the seat beside him, Ethan Cole started the engine and drove away, melting back into the pre-dawn darkness. He had done it. He had retrieved his fortune. The final, tangible link to the Keystone National Bank heist was now complete. The $2 million was his. Now came the hardest part of all, figuring out how to disappear with it. The duffel bag full of cash was both a liberation and a ticking clock. Ethan Cole knew he couldn't linger. The first crucial step was shedding his old identity entirely through carefully vetted, discreet channels arranged by his old contact. Channels paid for handsomely with a small fraction of the stolen cash. He acquired a set of high-quality, near-flawless fake identification documents, a new name, Robert Davis, a new social security number, a new driver's license, a fabricated work history. Ethan Cole, the bus driver, ceased to exist. Robert Davis, a nondescript man seeking quiet anonymity, was born. He put hundreds of miles between himself and his former life, traveling by bus, paying cash, leaving no trail. He settled in a small, sleepy town in a different state nestled amidst rolling hills, the kind of place where everyone minded their own business, where newcomers could blend in without too many questions as long as they kept a low profile. He rented a modest furnished one-bedroom apartment above a quiet shop, paying 6 months' rent up front in cash. Life as Robert Davis was intentionally unremarkable. He kept his interactions minimal, polite but distant. He took occasional handyman jobs around town, fixing leaky faucets, painting fences, minor repairs, always insisting on being paid in cash under the table. It provided a necessary veneer of normalcy, a reason for being there without creating any official employment or financial records that could be traced. The bulk of the money remained hidden, secured with the same meticulous care as before, perhaps beneath the floorboards of his rented apartment, accessible only to him. He lived frugally, avoiding any purchases that might attract attention. No fancy cars, no expensive gadgets, no extravagant lifestyle. The $2 million wasn't for flaunting. It was for survival, for the quiet freedom of not being beholden to anyone or anything, the freedom from the grinding desperation that had led him to the vault of Keystone National Bank in the first place. Years began to pass in this quiet, watchful rhythm. Robert Davis became a familiar, if distant figure in the small town. The quiet handyman who kept to himself. On the surface, he had achieved his goal. He was free, financially secure, beyond his wildest dreams, living a life entirely of his own making. Yet the shadow of Ethan Cole, and the ghost of the Keystone National Bank heist, never truly disappeared. It lingered in the back of his mind, a constant low-level hum of anxiety. Every time a police car cruised slowly down his street, his pulse would quicken. Every news report mentioning cold cases, new forensic techniques, or data breaches sent a chill down his spine. He knew the money was still officially listed as stolen, the case technically unsolved. Could some unforeseen technological advance, some random database connection, someday link Robert Davis back to Ethan Cole? He avoided deep friendships, sidestepped personal questions, cultivated an aura of benign solitude. The freedom the money bought was real, but it came at the price of genuine connection, of ever truly letting his guard down. He was materially free, but lived in a self-imposed prison of vigilance. Sometimes, late at night, sitting alone in his quiet apartment, he would wonder, was this peace? Or just a different kind of cage? The heist had been a singular act of defiance, a meticulously planned escape from a life he couldn't bear. He had succeeded where so many failed, pulling off a near-perfect crime and vanishing with the proceeds. But the burden of that success, the weight of the secret, was something he would carry alone every day for the rest of his life. Robert Davis was free, but Ethan Cole remained forever looking over his shoulder, the ghost in the quiet life he had so carefully constructed. The final chapter was written, but the ending remained uncertain.